Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. This week, we are excited to have the Director of Customer Success for MoveWorks, which is a co-pilot platform for automating employee support, Mr. Sae Ro. How's it going, sir?
It's going well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome, Sae.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did I miss anything on your introduction that you wanted to cover there? I just want to make sure if there's anything you want to add.
No, it's much more elaborate than what I would have said. So thank you.
Perfect. Well, we're excited to have you here. I know you're a fan of the pod and you listen to it. So one of the things we've implemented is kind of what's up this week, where we just kind of shout out any highlights, challenges, anything that came up this week. So I'll go to Colby first so he can answer what's been up with him this week and give you some time to think about it, Sae, since you're not used to that platform yet. But Colby, what's been up this week, man?
Not much. I actually went on vacation, so I had a long weekend. Took Friday and Monday off, and visited some family up in South Carolina. So had some fun in the mountains up there. Some nice, cooler weather instead of being in the Florida heat and humidity that we're used to. So that was nice. But yeah, that's kind of it for me.
Did you get any video games in on that?
No, it was a 4-day hiatus from games, so I had the itch as soon as I got back.
Probably destroyed you.
Yeah, Colby's been very open with his game loving on this, which is fantastic. Yeah.
Yep.
Shan, what about you, sir? Anything big this week you want to call out?
Yeah, today I signed a new job offer. So I will be beginning my next stage in my career path as a software engineer for a company around the Tampa Bay area. And it's really exciting. It's going to be my last week at my current role. So Friday is going to be my last day there, and looks like I'm starting fresh all over again.
Damn.
All right. Well,
congrats,
congratulations.
Man.
That's sorry for the company losing you, but excited for your next step in your journey. So congrats, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And okay, Sae, now it's what's up with you this week? Anything exciting and fun other than being on a podcast?
I mean, that's the highlight of the week. Come on.
Yeah.
So, yeah. On the personal side, looking forward to a snowboard trip this weekend. It's not like an exhaustive trip, but just a local. I got my daughter into snowboarding last year, so excited about that.
Sounds fun.
On the professional side, trying to figure out how I can best support my customers throughout the year. So doing a lot of goal setting with them and so on.
Very cool.
Awesome. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned getting ready for that personal vacation. I'm doing a little business/personal trip tomorrow. I actually head out to Vegas for a few days, so that'll be a nice little break from the norm as well. But yeah, we can dive into it. Sae, I know you, like I said earlier, you're a fan of the pod and you wanted to bring up a topic. So we thought, what better way than just have you on here so you can be a part of the mastermind. So
yeah, no, I appreciate you.
What do you want?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And I love the topics that you guys have covered in the past episodes. And Josh, you and I talked on the side in terms of various topics that I'm passionate about, that you're passionate about as well. One of the topics that I often hear about with especially high performing teams is imposter syndrome, right? This is when high performing teams or high achieving people have self doubt of intent, skill, or accomplishments. So I thought that was a fascinating topic. And personally, I also suffer it from time to time. But, how do I help my team, overcome some of these syndromes or this imposter syndrome so they can achieve their best, so they can contribute. But more importantly, not stress them out because there is a level of stress.
Yep.
So we'd love to hear from this group in terms of, have you suffered from it? Have you seen it within your team? Because you guys run a high performing team. And how do you help them overcome that?
There's a lot to unpack there for sure.
It
I mean, I
is.
That's a
think,
good one.
yeah, I think my first initial gut reaction, right, to your question, at least about have you ever experienced it, and I would have to say yes. I would err probably on the side that most people have experienced it, whether they gave it a name or not, right? Imposter syndrome, I think, impacts everyone, especially, not to call him out, but I would imagine Shan's going to feel a little bit of it over the next couple of weeks as he gets acclimated to his new role, right? I mean, anytime you start something new, there is a small element of faking it till you make it. If that,
Yep.
and part of that, I think, is that imposter syndrome. That's just my initial thoughts, but since I did call you out, Shan, what thoughts do you have around that?
No, yeah, no. Honestly, and you're right. And it's funny because like the job description for this new role specifically asks for skills that I've built a rapport on, that I've become familiar with. But it's been 2 years. It's been, you know, multiple things have happened in life since I've mastered that skill set, and it really it jumps in your head quickly, and it starts to tear down, kind of like your mindset going towards relearning these capabilities, or even like learning new capabilities, and you things start to get unclear on like the end result, especially when you're tackling something that's new and something that you really don't have too much experience, um, either like mastering or just doing on a day to day. So for myself, like I'm constantly in my head with the imposter syndrome, thinking that man, they're gonna discover that like I'm not bright, I'm not like good enough to catch on quickly, or like they're gonna ask me one specific question that I'm not gonna know the answer to, and it's gonna make me look like a fool for the next 3 years. And you just kind of really like start to overthink and overanalyze like what the reality of the next few weeks, few years, or few months are gonna be like when you're hit with imposter syndrome. And I think it's only when you're putting yourself in a position to where um, you're stepping into like an unfamiliar area. It's for me, like imposter syndrome doesn't generally just like fall into my lap on something that I'm either working towards, or something that like I can put my ego aside and admit that like I'm not very good at. It's when you're in that environment of unfamiliar areas is when that kind of like takes over. Even like at your current, like if you're in a current position or you're mastering a current skill, um, you're not really clouded too much because your expectations set, or like you have a sense of reality of what's going to happen for the next couple of weeks or next couple of months, or however long. But whenever you really step into the unknown of like you're not even sure of your environment yet, that's when you really start to jump in your head, and you doubt yourself, and you doubt the people around you, and you kind of just step into that imposter syndrome to me. But that's my interpretation of it. And yeah, you kind of nailed it with saying the whole role, or the whole new role event that's happening in my life, because for sure that's the only time that it usually clouds my mind.
Yeah. I mean, so from my perspective, I think there's a lot of things about imposter syndrome. It's a really great topic because it does affect so many people, including myself. And so we got like a good description of like what it is, and I think a lot of people kind of intuitively know what it is. And I think the reason why it occurs, and Shan also touched on, is it's always like when you're stretching out, like, or stretching yourself to do something new that you haven't done before, but that you most of the time feel like you could do it. It's just that there's always like these kind of nagging ideas in the back of your head that plague you with self doubt. And I think part of that's kind of like there's an old metaphor. I don't exactly know where it came from, but it's the idea where it's like the bigger the beach, the more unknown there is, essentially. So if you have a really tiny beach, there's the actual amount of water that can touch the surface area of the island is extremely small, right? And as the beach gets bigger, it's actually touching more water. And because of that, it's actually touching more of the unknown that exists around it. So the more you learn, you can kind of see it's the more you don't know. And that's usually what happens with people that they start to achieve more in their life, is that they learn a lot, and because they learn so much more than they did in the past, they actually they understand now how little they know about so many more things. And it's a very humbling experience, and it's a very important experience to have. Like, I think you should have that, and you should feel that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to come into contact with. It's just a matter of, I think, the next step of, once you kind of understand why it's occurring and that it's a very natural process, is the tools that you can use and the thought patterns that you can deploy to manage that stress or that event. And I think there's a couple of things, but I would say probably the most important one that I found for me personally is being comfortable with change and new things, generally speaking, and noticing the fact that you use similar mechanisms for learning each time you come into contact with something new, and you can trust those things and trust that part that is known to help you, like, sort of discover the new thing that you're approaching. Yeah.
So you said something interesting there. You said quite a few interesting things between the both of you, right? And I have some follow-up questions around that too. But one thing I wanted to ask Sae real quick, because what I heard there was, some of that imposter syndrome comes from an increase in awareness of your maybe learning what you don't know. There's that old adage, you don't know what you don't know. But it sounds like, to Colby's analogy on the beach, right? The more you become aware of what's out there, you kind of get a little bit wiser in the fact that maybe you don't know everything, and then that causes you to start questioning what you do know, especially when you're placed in an air of discomfort. So, Sae, do you think that there's like a correlation between, I guess, self-awareness and imposter syndrome? Because you almost have to be reflective to even get to that point, because if you're just think you've got it covered, you're not going to experience that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think self-awareness and reflection is a key piece to overcoming it, understanding it, or even, why you suffer from it. But I think what Colby was saying is like, yeah, as you take on more responsibility, there's a lot more to learn, right? So,
Yeah.
If you're lower on the totem pole, you have specific tasks you have to accomplish. You achieve those, then you're good. But as you go up, perhaps a management role, you have more responsibility because you're responsible for team, you're responsible for finances. In my case, I'm also responsible for customers. So, can I be an expert at everything? Right? Because it's a lot for me to learn. It's a lot for me to handle. And then some ways that imposter syndrome manifests itself is like, what is it, perfectionism, right? I can't be perfect at everything if I have so much to take on or if I have so much responsibilities. And yeah, I've been trying to think about this, self-reflect and being self-aware in terms of, am I suffering from it? How am I suffering from it? But more importantly, how can I overcome it?
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the key piece.
Well, yeah, and that was kind of my second question. So Colby's been sharing with us the last few weeks that he's been training some individuals in his office about bringing them onto new roles. And I would imagine, again, similar, when you start a new role, there's an element of that imposter syndrome that wants to sneak in. But do you think, and this is, I guess I'll direct this at you, Colby, since you've been doing it, but do you think that the support and reinforcement and the training and all of the things you've been doing to onboard those individuals that you've been sharing with us, do you think that alleviates some of that imposter syndrome because they either feel supported and they know that they don't have to be at that top level performance, or you're giving them the tools to maybe feel confident in the task that they're doing? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that with practical applications, since you've been doing it recently.
So I actually think, and I did consciously do it with the two people that I recently trained, because I felt in a similar way where it's being trained on the task to do definitely helps to build confidence and to lessen that sense of imposter syndrome, because you're actually doing the work, right? You're moving around, you're doing the tasks, you're completing them. They're telling that you that you did a good job on it, etc. Like, you get more feedback related to the specific task. But I think what's more important to that is I try to convey that I myself do not know everything. I am not perfect. I do not know everything. I have my own flaws. I'm very like open about how I think too, right? Because sometimes when you just give an answer to someone and it sounds good, they're like, wow, this person like really knows what they're talking about. Like, holy cow, they got everything under wraps. And it's a lot of times it's no. A lot of times they're like, why did you think that? Well, I kind of just winged it off the top of my head based off of my experience and all the intuition I've built over the years of my experience. And yes, that is like a really great skill set. And it's not anything to necessarily scoff at, but it wasn't like this level of deliberation that people imagine others thinking that are doing a really good job or in a position that they really hold in high esteem. And so I try to just be very real and honest with people and transparent with that, because I think it lowers their guard with me, to the sense that like they're like, oh, okay, like I can be a person around this guy, and he's gonna understand that's okay. Like, it's okay to not know things. And so I think as a manager, as a leader, I think that's one thing that you can do to help alleviate that feeling, at least from my perspective. Because when I'm talking with someone who is also very real and down to earth, I'm like a sigh of relief, like, oh, okay, like I can just be organic and not worry. Because I think that's part of what leads to it, is that you have this idea of what it should be like to be really good at this job, and what your employer is expecting, and you're trying to meet those expectations and meet this ideal, and you're like worried that like, oh, if you show anything that's wrong, like, they're going to want to fire you, or like they're not going to want you on their team. And so like you have all these like worries about, how they're judging you. But like, if you know the fact that they kind of expect you to, struggle a bit and get used to things, you feel a lot more comfortable to make mistakes, right? Because everyone makes mistakes, and you can't be afraid to make them. Otherwise, I think you just struggle even more.
I think that's what
Sure.
drives imposter syndrome to me, anyway. It's either having like unclear and just kind of like vague understanding of what someone's expectations are that you're going to be either working with or working to impress, or those knowing those expectations and knowing that they're kind of cutthroat, or they're at least like they're challenging in a sense. Because actually, from what you were saying, that really kind of triggered in my mind. Like, well, from what Josh said too, like the whole fake it till you make it mentality goes away as soon as someone's like, "Hey, man, like we all just kind of like learned this as we went, and we don't expect you to know any of this, but we're here to teach you." Like as soon as you have that kind of conversation with someone who's like directing you towards that kind of imposter syndrome, it's almost the fake it till you make it kind of just dissolves, and you're more comfortable with, okay, let me be as intuitive as I can and try to learn as much as I can as quickly as possible. But there's no like looming expectation or pressure to kind of make me feel like I have to step into faking it until I make it.
Yep.
So, if I may,
Yeah,
I would like to throw it over to Josh in terms of, you run a high performing team, right?
Mhm.
You've built one from the ground up. You've inherited some. You've repaired some. So, what do you instill in your team to perform at a high level, but make sure they don't suffer from this? And also, if I may just add, how do you
Yeah.
identify some of this if someone's suffering from it?
Yeah. I think a lot of it goes with what Colby was saying. If I take it from the leadership lens, I do think that vulnerability is super important when you are really asking somebody to give more or be a high performing team. It's there's a few things. One is, creating a goal that you can all work towards. So you take a little bit of that in. You still have individuality. You want to personalize, your leadership style and method towards folks, but then also really focusing on team alignment and goals kind of takes out some of that burden to be the only person that can do the thing or the only one carrying that objective. And so imposter syndrome kind of fades a little bit at that point, because you are now a team working towards an objective rather than an individual, and your skills, I guess, can be balanced and matched and filled in with other members of the team. So maybe I am not the best at some of the fine detail work, but I have members on my team that are. So collectively, we've got the skill set to do anything we put our minds to, even though individually, maybe I would suffer from imposter syndrome, chasing after some of those goals, because I'm not, to your point earlier, Say, I'm not going to be naturally gifted at every single thing that I touch. And as my scope of focus expands as well, it gets more and more difficult to be perfect at all those things. So the best thing you can do from a leadership perspective, I feel like, is find those individuals that you can trust and empower and guide and support when necessary, but really let them step up to the plate with the skills that they have and maximize those. It's a lot more difficult to feel imposter syndrome if you're doing the things you're great at. So giving people the opportunity to do that, and that kind of lends itself to the second question you said of how do you identify when people are having those feelings and thoughts. One of the things I do anytime I step into a new team or absorb new team members or even hire somebody new is I have a one-on-one with them almost immediately. And it's not for me to express my thoughts, my ideas. It's really so I can hear them and hear what they enjoy, hear what their aspirations are. Doesn't mean that I'm going to instantly be able to provide a solution or a path right away, but it does help me sculpt an environment where everyone can utilize their strengths and excel that way. Because again, if you are given the opportunity to utilize your strengths, you almost never are going to have that imposter syndrome because you're comfortable in that area. You want to figure out ways to still allow for that growth and expansion of those skills, but usually that comes naturally when somebody is in an area that they excel at. So I think for me, really having those conversations with people to find out what they're good at, what they love, and then structuring a team around that towards a common purpose helps eliminate that individual fear, which also kind of negates that imposter syndrome.
Great.
Did I answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's
Good,
great.
good.
Yeah.
So, we talked here a couple times about how this all works in a healthy environment, right? And that's great. But what about if you find yourself in an environment where maybe you don't have somebody that's going to be vulnerable and, or supportive or any of those things, kind of feel like, I think it was episode 2 when we had the fan write in with that question. And, that was definitely sounded like the environment they were in. So how do you combat that when you're maybe not in the settings, right, where there's vulnerability, trust, teamwork, all of that stuff?
Well, Colby said it was important earlier. Like imposter syndrome was important, and that's where I think like it actually steps in and he can provide some sort of benefit. I mean, it's obviously not good to say like go in and fake it till you make it and just like live that imposter or let that imposter syndrome in. But when you're in a cutthroat kind of environment to where someone's not being vulnerable with you and kind of like lowering the expectations for you stepping into the environment as a new individual, it doesn't always hurt to kind of play that fake it till you make it, just to keep your head afloat. And at that point, really, it's changing your mindset to just be adaptive as quickly as you can. My suggestions or guidance for like post that, like a few months down the road and you're still kind of in that environment, I don't know. Like that's a good question for like managing it, right? Because like how long can you step into a situation to where like you're living in doubt, but you're not projecting it?
Yeah, I mean,
I would think. Sorry, go ahead, Colby.
Josh.
No, I was just going to say, I think of it, and I was thinking about Sae too here, because I think there's an element of evaluating yourself or being able to support your product, right? And so, say I think about what you're doing with MoveWorks and supporting your customers. Obviously,
Mhm.
there's a component of that of, hey, look, these are the cold hard facts of metrics, right? And this is how we're performing. I would think that there might be some value from an individual in an unhealthy environment to be able to track your own performance metrics around what you're doing, right? Because those expectations, at bare minimum, should hopefully exist in some sort of job profile or something like that. Or if it doesn't, at least you have a baseline to gauge yourself off of. And so when you have the conversations too, at some point with upper management or anything, if you are ever questioned, at least you have supporting detail to say, hey, look, I'm not an imposter. I mean, this is how I'm performing. It's continued to improve over time, most likely. You can kind of justify, I guess, those feelings in an environment like that. If you weren't in a supportive environment,
Like a sink
that
or
might be
swim
my approach.
situation.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would look at it from two different approaches. So if I'm an employee and I am in like a not as necessary supportive environment or a toxic environment, and I feel this way, what am I doing to communicate up how much I am achieving, how much I'm contributing, make my manager aware, both sides in terms of my strengths, what I've accomplished, and some of my weaknesses where I've helped. If they continue to put pressure or continue to run this negative environment, sadly, maybe it's my responsibility to go find a better environment that's suited for me.
Yep.
Okay,
yeah,
from a manager or leader perspective, yeah, that's part of the reason why I asked you this question, Josh. Like, how do you identify people
Mm.
who may be suffering from it, and how do I, comfort them or produce a better environment, a more productive environment? Because maybe it's my behavior, right? Me suffering from imposter syndrome, want to be perfect, want to be a superhero, um, is setting a really high bar and putting pressure on my team.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the I joke about it a lot, but one of the guys that I actually think was a pretty solid manager, even though he maybe wasn't always portrayed that way. It was Michael Scott on the Office. So if you've seen that, one of the things he did exceptionally well, I mean, um, is he did not make himself super intimidating, right? He would break up the I guess the tension in a room. There's one episode in particular. I remember the company's like headed out of business, and he decides to have a murder mystery game just to really distract everyone from the big problem in the room, because worrying about it, focusing on it, there really is nothing that could come from that benefit wise. So that's the other side I think of it too, and I tell this to my kids all the time. But at the end of the day, one of the ways I combat imposter syndrome is I just simply say, have I done my best? Right? Because if I've done my best, there's literally nothing else I could do. Even if somebody wants me to do better, that's what I've got. And if it's not enough, to your point a second ago, say maybe I do need to evaluate, and maybe it's not the right role, maybe it's not the right environment, and I have to make those personal decisions, which aren't always easy, especially if there's other benefits to that role. But if I feel like I'm not good enough, but I've done my best, I can also be very satisfied with that, because I know that at least I didn't phone it in, and that's why I'm not performing. It's not due to a lack of effort.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I guess it goes back to reflection and being self-aware. You've done your best.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was gonna jump in because I think there's like a few things that are really crucial. A few of which you guys have already touched on, but one I definitely think is just generally, we had that episode where we talked about confidence and believing in yourself and why that's important and all that sort of things. And I definitely think that's huge here, because one of the reasons self-doubt exists is a lot of times because you don't have confidence in your ability to perform the task. But I think the confidence in this situation, like I said earlier, comes from knowing they're being confident in your ability to learn. I think if you have that, you can be extremely unstoppable because you can come into a situation with the intangibles and learn what you need to do. But I think combining that with the fact that you need to train. So I think a lot of people sometimes think, well, I'll just jump into the job and I'll just kind of learn as I go. And that is a great mindset, or that can be good enough in a lot of situations where you can get enough experience on the job to perform the tasks that are needed. Sometimes, just like in school when you're growing up, some kids have to study their ass off and some kids didn't need to study at all. And it's okay either way, but you need to know which type of person you are. And if you need to put in those extra hours, put in those extra hours to develop yourself, to train, to, do the personal development outside of work if you need to, like push yourself if that's something that you really want. And then I think the third thing is review, in the sense that, have some sort of reflection with yourself that you can do on, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, like jot down where you feel like you're at so you can look back and see how far you've come. I think it's important because if you just go day by day, you don't actually get a clear scope of how much you've accomplished over a longer period of time. But also I think it's important, like Josh had mentioned before, the one-on-ones are so crucial that you have with your direct boss, because I really learned that working with Josh, because that was something that he highly prioritized, and I noticed right away in my feelings is that I felt so much more at home at the job I was in. I felt so much more willing to provide feedback, to get feedback, to ask for like, hey, like how am I doing? Like how do you perceive what it is that I'm doing? And I think that's really crucial to this part that we're talking about with imposter syndrome, is ask your direct boss how you're doing and ask them what it is, if anything, that they'd like you to improve on, or do they view what you're providing to the team as, more than enough and that you're doing a great job. You need to have that, because a lot of us can be extremely hard on ourselves, and if you just rely on yourself, you're always going to think you're not doing good enough. I mean, I'm very much, I do that to myself all the time, where I don't think what I provided was good enough because I saw all the little tiny like nooks and crannies that no one else can see because they see the bigger picture. So yeah, I think those three things are really helpful things to employ when dealing with it.
I love that, Kobe.
Yeah,
Was it Nick Saban?
there's a couple.
Yeah, if I may, I think it was Nick Saban who said
Yeah,
the high performers are the one who ask, what else can I do? How can I improve? And so on. But to your other piece, think about what you've accomplished. I heard this interesting stat. You go to the gym twice a week, you're probably in the top 1% of being healthy in the world, right? Think about that, right? So you could be at the gym. I don't know. There could be like these like really fit guys, and you're comparing yourself to them versus you showed up at least twice a week, and you're in the healthiest or the top 1% of the healthy population.
Yep,
So it's just putting it into perspective.
absolutely.
yeah.
Yep.
Now that's a great point. What are you comparing yourself against? Are you comparing yourself against the entire sample, or are you comparing yourself against, what you can see in the moment?
For sure.
Yep.
And then at my company, there are so many PhDs. Sometimes I am intimidated, but at the same time, am I going to compare myself to them or some of the other things that I can do? I'm better at versus them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
I don't have a
Yeah,
PhD, but maybe I'm stronger in other areas.
they're
absolutely.
overrated. So,
That's a lot of money to pay for a paperwork.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. One thing I wanted to circle back to, because Colby mentioned, the importance of the one-on-ones, and I completely agree. The one thing I would caution leaders or anyone listening to this podcast when establishing those, or even as a participant, it's important to treat those as one of the most important things on your schedule, if not the most important things, because the worst thing from either side is to not show up, cancel, postpone, move, because subconsciously, unfortunately, the message you're sending is something else is more important than you.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's either way. That could be from the leader moving it or even from the employee moving it. And at a certain point, that message comes across as, okay, well, if these meetings aren't important, I'm not important. Am I an imposter here? And it does start to impact that emotion unintentionally most of the time. It's not like somebody's doing it on purpose, but that is one thing that was always super important to me, was to make sure that I tried not to move them unless I absolutely had to. I would decline other meetings because I had those meetings. They had the priority. And then, say, one other thing I wanted to circle back for you, that one of the initial questions you had is really from a team perspective. What is something that you can do for your team members? And there's different tools out there that help with this. But one of the things that I found incredibly helpful are 360s. Now, it can be a little bit of a costly endeavor sometimes. There are some free ones that maybe aren't quite as robust, but a 360, if you're not familiar, if any of our listeners aren't, it's basically a survey evaluation of you as a person, but from all angles. So if you do have any direct reports or your peers, your boss, typically there's an other group for people that don't fall into those categories. And then you're actually able to kind of get the broad perspective rather than, you individualizing how you feel. And then you can get a true opinion. And whether it's bad or good, at least you're no longer, trying to evaluate yourself on an individual scale that you've created.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's a tool that, like I said, I've used in the past, and I know I've found some free ones, but that might be something to look into, especially if you are a leader of a team and have budgetary items that you can utilize.
Sure.
Super powerful.
Great. Thank you.
I'm curious
Shannon,
on.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say I'm curious on one thing that's related to imposter syndrome, and it's part of what I think also can lead to it. It's more specific to a new job situation, so that's why I was curious to ask Shan. Is I felt this in the past where you apply for a job and you view it as the next step in your career. You feel like you can learn it, you can get into it, and you're going to do a good job. You know deep down that you can, but you don't have the direct, oh, you need to have X amount of experience, you need to have X skill set, et cetera on the resume. But somehow they notice you, they like you, you get the job. But when you get in, you're like, man, like now I need to show that I can actually do this. And I think that's part of what it is because it's almost like we put it on ourselves. Like well, I knew that I wasn't at the exact level that this company or this person wanted, and now I need to fulfill my promise. It's almost like literally fulfilling a promise to someone, and I think that's part of what creates the anxiety. And I'm curious, like Shan, did you feel that at all with your like current application, or do you feel like it was less of that?
Every single new role I've ever stepped in, I've
Yeah.
overwhelmingly brought that in as my mindset starting the job. I mean, generally, most people, I would say, there's a lot of people who apply for what they're acclimated with and what they qualify for. But there's so many check boxes when it comes to like working in a whole different environment or having a completely different job title than what you previously had, that those check boxes aren't always met. And yeah, that you're constantly faced with like, what do I specifically do to like validate myself as being like prepared and being able to to be a high performer, basically. And I really, that's where I think kind of, you mentioned like the whole confidence comes into play and like ambition, because in reality, like in the back of your mind, most people will probably know like, I fully believe in my ability to learn and become a high performer. I just don't know how to do it yet because this is brand new to me and everything's scary. And like the best analogy I can kind of like relate this to, and it's always the case for me. If I travel to a new like destination, like let's say like I travel Orlando or Tampa, where I'm not like crazy familiar in, and this is like common for when I start a new position in like a city like Orlando or Tampa. I'm navigating there through GPS, no idea where I'm parking, no idea like where I should park, where I should walk, what building I should go in, like the architecture of the streets and like what's the quickest way. And then like right in the back of my mind is like, I'm never gonna figure this out. Like I will have to do this for like 5 years to like get a grasp on how large this like metropolitan area is, and like how confusing all the streets look like, and like the one way, and then suddenly like 2 months later you're like everything is just familiar. Like you're familiar with the either the campus or the building that you're working in. You're familiar with how to get there without a GPS, and it just like it all becomes more simple than your expectation at the beginning. It's just the problem is you didn't have the clarity on how things were going to become simple. But in reality, it's just repetition and ambition, and of course, like consistency. It goes back to your beach analogy too. We kept mentioning like the unknown and how much we don't know, but at the same time, you're stuck in a small beach and there's this much of unknown, but at the end of it, like as you discover more and more of the known, you realize it's still a beach. Like there's not too much crazy things about it. I mean, there might be, I don't know, like a beached whale or like some kind of like crazy seashell down the shore, but like in reality, at the end of the day, I think your expectations a lot like higher at the beginning until you're comfortable in that environment, and then you start all over again. Then you like travel to another beach or start a new job, and it completely resets, and you just kind of forget.
We're never gonna get away from the beach.
Yeah,
I was gonna say whatever analogy Colby brings in, that's the one we lock in.
Yeah, cooking, islands. What's next week, Colby?
Yeah.
Got to find out on the next episode, I guess.
Imagine never being to the beach before, and like your mind, like where it's gonna race to.
Yeah.
Like there's gonna be like a jungle and like 15 feet, and then there's gonna be all this crazy stuff. But then like, I mean, we've all been to Florida here, and you know, a lot of us live in Florida, so the beach really isn't nothing crazy once you actually get to it. Like it's a very simple kind of environment, but we're probably the only ones with that kind of mindset versus someone who, I don't know, lives in the West or doesn't really experience the beach much or never has experienced the beach. So
yeah,
they kind of live in that imposter syndrome in a way. But
yeah,
that's my
sometimes one final question.
Yeah, I was just going to say sometimes that beach on the flyer that's pristine and gorgeous too, when you actually get there, doesn't live up to the hype. So I get what you're saying. Yep. I can go either way. But Sae, what was that question you had, Ken?
Yeah, no, I had one final question to the group which is, how do you balance it? You want to develop a high performing team and you want to set high expectations for them because some of them, you know, they can achieve it, but yet you don't want to stress them out too much, right? Because they're going to feel imposter syndrome. So how do we strike that balance?
For me,
that's $1 million question.
Yeah, I think for me, it's walking alongside them. One of the things that has been a leadership tenet for me since the very first job that I had at Papa John's Pizza, probably, God, was it like 26, 27 years ago? I don't even know anymore, but a long time ago, they kind of gave me the opportunity to oversee the crew. And there was a disgusting task that I had never been given because I was a pretty hard worker, and it was cleaning out the grease trap, right? And if you've ever worked in fast food, grease traps, it's exactly what it sounds like. Awful. It's the place where it all goes, and it's disgusting. And I had never been given that task, never been required to do it. I got put into this leadership role, and, it was my turn to divvy out that assignment. And the very first night that came up, I'm the guy that did the grease trap. Wasn't required, didn't need to happen, but I was never going to ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do. Now, I'd be lying if I said I ever did it again, but I did do it, and I did it before I ever asked anyone else to do it because I wanted to ensure that if I'm going to put a goal or an objective or an item in front of you, that I too am willing to do that. And I've carried that philosophy on through my entire career. I've overseen a lot of service desks in the IT realm. And even though, I'm a director at this point, if that phone's ringing, I will pick it up and I will do a service call. Now, if there's somebody around that's their primary function and they can grab it, I let them do that. But in the situation where they're not, I'm not above grabbing a phone call and just doing what needs to get done. And I think that willingness to be alongside your team with whatever task comes up helps again drive towards that team goal and kind of eliminates that individual fear that leads to that imposter syndrome. So there's my 2 cents around that anyway.
Yeah, I get a vibe of inspiration from is what you're kind of saying. Don't put pressure on them to where they feel to need to step into the imposter syndrome or the imposter environment, but lead with inspiration to the point where they're kind of bouncing off of each other and like, okay, Colby's nailing it at gaining this certification. I want to do that, and I want to take it to the next level, and kind of like non-combatively like progress together, if that makes any sense. Like lead from inspiration, because in reality, like I see what Sae's point is that with that balance, because you don't want to create an environment where there's heavy pressure on someone, but you also don't want to create an environment where there's not high expectations of like becoming a high performer.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
Yeah, competition can be healthy if you all share the same common goal, right? Because you're competing with each other. Think of it like a sports team. Yes, there's somebody that you're somewhere, but the ones alongside of you, you guys are collectively trying to achieve the same goal. So, some of the best players in the world lead the leagues in assists, right? Rather than the actual goal, because their team, their part. And, if they were out there by themselves, maybe they would feel a little bit of that imposter syndrome, not a goal leader. But without them, that team wouldn't win. So.
Yeah, I think too with this, it also really comes down to if you're issuing demands versus empowering your employees to achieve amazing tasks that they can be proud of and fulfilled with. Because if you just have a sort of like list of things that's like, hey, you just got to do X, 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 and like it just needs to be done, like you got to do it, whatever, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, I guess completing this list is nice, but like it wasn't really fulfilling or interesting to any degree. And I really noticed that when Josh brought me onto his team initially was that piece where I felt empowered to take ownership over my realm of control and make it even better than it was when I got there. And I think that experience made me realize that like it wasn't the only thing, but just work can be very fulfilling and interesting. The more ownership and responsibility you have in your area of control that you do have control of. And I think the more you can empower them to be proud of what they're doing instead of just meeting expectations, I think they'll actually exceed your expectations and they'll also be happier to do it. And I think that it's almost like giving them something to run away from, but also run towards at the same time. I think you have to have a healthy balance of both, right? You can't just have a bunch of negative consequences. You have to have something that's actually they're striving for. I mean, that's also like very apparent in psychology literature as well. But I think those two things are really important.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, Sae, how do we do addressing imposter syndrome?
You guys did an amazing job. The big question is, how did I do? Will I get invited back?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. No, you were fantastic. And absolutely, we'll have you back. I'll tell you this, one other segment that we typically do is final thoughts, right? So we just kind of give everyone the opportunity to wrap up anything that maybe they didn't be able to include. So I'll be kind to you again. I won't throw it at you first and foremost. I'll throw it at Colby this week first. So Colby, any final thoughts around this topic?
Got it. All right. Well, first, I definitely going to say thank you, Sae, for being on the podcast. It was great having you. Definitely would love to have you back. Always appreciate new perspectives and new questions and everything being brought to the podcast. It's always fun. And I guess final thoughts is when you feel imposter syndrome, like just as like a, I guess, coping mechanism or a way to deal with it is just remember that everyone experiences it, and it doesn't just because you are experiencing it doesn't mean you're not able enough to meet the challenge ahead of you, and see it as a challenge that you are capable of overcoming. Yeah, like it's just because you experience it, like, because I remember that stuff, that's kind of stuff that I used to feel was just like, oh well, like the true high performers, the true like people that were really excellent, they don't get this feeling, they just perform, they're just amazing people, right? And it's, I'm somehow less because I've experienced these self-doubts. And just keep in mind that, as you heard from all of us on here and from all of our experiences, that is far from the truth. Everyone that is a high performer will have self-doubts at one point in time, and probably will never stop, just by the nature of what creates it, as we discussed earlier as well. So yeah, just be confident, get through it, chug along. You can definitely overcome it.
Absolutely. Shan, final thoughts, sir?
I'm basically going to reiterate what Colby said with another office event. So in the office, when Michael Scott starts his own paper company, we're all aware, if you're familiar with that episode, he has no idea what he's doing. But he's going in with that layer of competency and confidence, to where he's basically just throwing crap at the wall until it sticks. And at the end of the day, like, he gets bought out. He does what he aimed to do. He damages Dunder Mifflin, which is, a multi-million-dollar paper company, and he actually figures it out. Even though he's very aware, and he might not be open about it with everyone, but as he was open with his employees, Pam and Ryan, he was, he broke down, told them, and was vulnerable with them, saying, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I feel like giving up. That overwhelmingly doubt was taking over his mind, but at the end of the day, he just stayed consistent, was confident, and knew that he had the potential to do it. And look at the end result. So that's basically, all I got for Imposter Syndrome.
Sae, I'm coming to you now, sir. Final thoughts
That's
around this
okay.
topic.
I don't know if I should admit or not, but I've never seen The Office. Maybe I need to binge it prior to the next episode. But
about that
I think-
reinvite.
I think at the end of the day, it's pressure, right? It's a different type of pressure. It depends on how you leverage it, harness it, right? You can use it to motivate you, do great things, or you can use, it could hinder you. It's just a matter of how you react, how you work with it. And then to the discussion, is your team helping you? Is your leader helping you? Leverage, harness this pressure.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap up my last thought here too is, we talked a lot about high performers and how this can impact high performers. But I think again, we've hit it. It impacts everybody. I think what makes you the high performer is the high perseverance, right? Can you push through that feeling of imposter syndrome? Can you drive yourself to learn necessary skills, to get that familiarity and that repetition, going back to Shan's analogy earlier about being familiar with the area that you're in. That familiarity eliminates a lot of that feeling of imposter syndrome. So it's really just a matter, can you push through that barrier and overcome it? Because everyone feels it, everybody's experiencing it, and it's just a matter of, can you find a way to still function, operate, and succeed, and hopefully excel despite that internal nagging feeling. Because even if you're fantastic at what you do, there's always going to be a little voice in the back of your head, because we're humans, going, well, maybe not, right?
Yeah.
I think being able to persevere and continue on is key to also combating feelings of imposter syndrome. So that was it. Mastermind for the Masses today. Please like, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. We are anywhere you want to listen: Patreon, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, wherever you can find us, we're there. And we'd love to hear what you want us to talk about next. Feel free to post in the comments, or reach out to us in any way that you want. And who knows, maybe you'll even find yourself on an episode of Mastermind for the Masses. Thanks again, Sae. And we'll see you all next week. All right.